The space station Horizon 7 floated silently in the void between stars. Its white metal walls reflected the distant light of twin suns as it orbited the newly discovered planet Kepler 442c. Inside the station, 23 humans worked day and night to study the strange life forms they had found on the world below. Taemin wiped sweat from his forehead as he bent over his workbench. The young botanist had spent 3 years studying alien plants, but nothing had prepared him for what they had brought back from their last mission to the planet's surface. The specimens were unlike anything in Earth's databases. Some glowed with soft blue light, others moved without wind. A few seemed to watch him work with leaves that turned to follow his movements. "Another late night, Taemin?" So Young called from across the lab. The marine biologist was packing up her equipment for the day. Her specimens floated in glass tanks filled with purple water from the planet's oceans. "Just one more test," Taemin replied. He pointed to a vine-like plant in a sealed container. "This one is different from all the others. Watch this." He tapped the glass gently. The vine's purple flowers opened wider and released a small puff of what looked like golden dust. The particles sparkled in the lab's bright lights before settling on the container's walls. "Pretty," So Young said, moving closer. "What do you think those particles are?" "I'm not sure yet. They might be spores, or maybe some kind of chemical signal." Taemin made notes on his tablet. "The vine only releases them when it senses movement nearby. It's like it's trying to communicate." So Young yawned. "Well, don't stay up too late. Dr. Haewan wants everyone fresh for tomorrow's briefing about the new samples coming up from the surface." After So Young left, Taemin continued his work. He carefully took samples of the golden particles and placed them under his microscope. What he saw made him lean back in surprise. The particles weren't just spores. They were moving with purpose. Each tiny speck had what looked like microscopic tendrils that waved back and forth as if searching for something. "Incredible," he whispered to himself. "They're definitely alive." What Taemin didn't know was that far across the galaxy, an ancient intelligence had been watching and waiting. The Dominion entity had spent millions of years perfecting the art of conquest. They didn't use weapons or armies. Instead, they used themselves. Each member of their species was a living weapon designed to take control of other beings' minds. They had conquered thousands of worlds this way. The process was always the same: infiltrate, dominate, and consume. No species had ever resisted them successfully. The creature that would come to call itself Nexus Prime was one of their most experienced infiltrators. It had taken control of over 300 different life forms across 47 different worlds. Gas beings, crystal entities, hive minds, single consciousness species, none had posed any real challenge. When the Dominion entity scouts first detected intelligent life on the third planet of a yellow star, they prepared their usual strategy. They encoded their infiltration agents into what appeared to be harmless plant spores. The humans would study them, expose themselves to them, and within days their entire species would belong to the Dominion. Nexus Prime had volunteered for this mission because early scans showed the humans had individual brains rather than a hive mind. Individual minds were always easier to control. The creature compressed itself into millions of microscopic particles and waited patiently inside the alien vine. Now, as Taemin studied the samples under his microscope, Nexus Prime prepared to begin its work. The human leaned close to the eyepiece, breathing normally. That was all the opening the parasite needed. The ventilation system in the lab hummed quietly as it recycled the station's air. The golden particles were so small that the filters couldn't catch them all. Slowly, invisibly, Nexus Prime's microscopic components spread through the air ducts and into the breathing systems of everyone on board. But Nexus Prime focused most of its attention on Taemin. The young botanist would be its primary host. The creature began the infiltration process by sending its particles through Tae-min's lungs and into his bloodstream. Tae-min felt nothing at first. He continued making notes about the strange spores, unaware that billions of alien organisms were now flowing through his body toward his brain. The parasites moved with practiced efficiency, following nerve pathways and blood vessels like tiny guided missiles. Within an hour, the first wave of Nexus Prime's consciousness reached Tae-min's brain. The creature expected to find the usual: structure, memory centers, motor controls, basic survival instincts. What it found instead made it pause in confusion. The human brain was chaos. Thoughts bounced around randomly, emotions mixed with logic in ways that made no sense. Memories were stored not in neat categories but in tangled webs connected by the strangest associations. The creature tried to make sense of it all, but found itself getting lost in the maze of human consciousness. Nexus Prime had infiltrated the brains of creatures with 50 different thinking patterns, but this was completely new. The human mind seemed to operate on principles that violated everything the parasite understood about intelligent life. Still, Nexus Prime was confident. It had never failed before. It began the standard process of mapping neural pathways and identifying control centers, but every time it tried to establish a connection, the human's thoughts shifted to something else entirely. Tae-min rubbed his eyes and yawned. He had been working for 14 hours straight. His mind wandered to thoughts of home, his family, the dinner he had skipped, a song his sister used to sing, the way sunlight looked on water, and dozens of other random things. Inside his brain, Nexus Prime struggled to follow these mental jumps. How could one mind hold so many unrelated thoughts at the same time? How did humans make decisions when their thinking process was so disorganized? The parasite decided to try a more direct approach. It attempted to send a simple command to Tae-min's. Motor controls. Raise your right hand. Nothing happened. Nexus Prime tried again, this time with more force. Still nothing. The human continued making notes and examining samples as if the most advanced mind control parasite in the galaxy wasn't even there. For the first time in its long existence, Nexus Prime felt something it had never experienced before. Doubt. Tae-min finally finished his work and headed to his quarters for some sleep. As he walked through the station's corridors, he felt oddly alert despite his tiredness. Colors seemed brighter somehow. He could hear conversations from rooms he passed more clearly than usual. Strange dreams flickered at the edges of his thoughts. He shook his head and attributed it to exhaustion. Tomorrow he would feel better. Tomorrow he would understand what those golden spores really were. But inside his mind, an ancient predator was beginning to realize that it might have made a terrible mistake. The humans weren't like other species at all. And now Nexus Prime was trapped inside a form of consciousness it couldn't understand or control. The infiltration was supposed to take 72 hours. But as Tae-min fell asleep, and his dreams began to blend with the parasite's thoughts, Nexus Prime understood with growing alarm that something had gone very, very wrong. Tae-min woke up feeling like he had swallowed lightning. Every nerve in his body hummed with energy he had never felt before. Colors looked brighter through his small window. The hum of the station's engines sounded like music. Even his own heartbeat seemed louder and more rhythmic than usual. He sat up in bed and immediately regretted it. His head spun with dizziness and something else. Memories that weren't his own flashed through his mind. He saw vast cities made of crystal floating in purple skies. He watched massive ships travel between stars at impossible speeds. He felt the satisfaction of controlling thousands of minds across dozens of worlds. "What is happening to me?" he whispered, holding his head in his hands. Inside his brain, Nexus Prime was fighting a battle unlike any in its long existence. The creature had spent the entire night trying to establish control over its human host. Every attempt had failed spectacularly. Human thoughts moved in patterns that made no logical sense. When Nexus Prime tried to access Tae-min's memories of scientific knowledge, it found them mixed together with memories of childhood songs, cooking recipes, and emotional responses to sunsets. When it attempted to control motor functions, the signals got lost in a maze of random neural connections. Even worse, the human's mind was fighting back in ways the parasite couldn't predict. Every time Nexus Prime pushed deeper into Tae-min's consciousness, it encountered resistance that felt almost playful. The human brain seemed to be treating the invasion like a game rather than a life-or-death struggle. Tae-min stumbled to his bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. In the mirror, he noticed his eyes looked different. They were brighter, more alert. His reflection seemed to be looking back at him with intelligence that felt foreign yet familiar. "Pull yourself together," he told his reflection. "Too much work, not enough sleep. That's all this is." But as he spoke, he heard something else. A whisper in the back of his mind that wasn't quite a voice. It felt frustrated and confused. It was trying to tell him something, but the words wouldn't form properly. Nexus Prime was indeed frustrated. In all its centuries of conquest, it had never encountered a species whose thoughts were so chaotic, yet so resistant to control. The human mind was like trying to hold water with a net. Every time the parasite thought it had grasped something important, the thoughts slipped away and reformed somewhere else. What made it worse was that the human seemed completely unaware of the battle happening inside his own head. Tae-min went about his morning routine as if nothing unusual was happening. He brushed his teeth while humming a song. He ate breakfast while thinking about 17 different things at once. He checked his schedule while daydreaming about flying. How do they function like this? Nexus Prime wondered. On every other world it had conquered, intelligent minds worked in orderly patterns. Thoughts led to decisions, which led to actions. But human minds seemed to work backwards, sideways, and inside out all at the same time. Tae-min arrived at the laboratory early. So Young was already there, examining her ocean samples under a microscope. "You look terrible," she said, without looking up from her work. "Thanks for the encouragement," Tae-min replied, but his voice sounded different, even to himself. There was an edge to it he had never heard before. "I didn't sleep well." "Bad dreams?" Tae-min paused. He had dreamed, but not about normal things. His dreams had been filled with images of conquest and domination. He had seen himself standing on alien worlds, watching as entire civilizations bowed before him. But in the dreams, the feeling of power had been mixed with something else. Loneliness. A deep, aching loneliness that stretched across millennia. "Something like that," he said finally. As Tae-min began his daily work, Nexus Prime tried a different approach. Instead of fighting the chaos of human thought, it tried to understand it. The parasite began following the strange connections in Tae-min's mind, trying to see how humans actually made decisions. What it discovered was even more confusing than the chaos itself. Humans didn't just think with their brains, they thought with their entire bodies. Emotions came from the heart and stomach. Intuition came from somewhere the parasite couldn't even locate. Memory wasn't just stored information, but was tied to smells, sounds, and feelings in ways that defied all logic. Worse yet, humans seemed to make their best decisions not through careful analysis, but through something they called gut feelings. These feelings came from nowhere the parasite could detect and led to actions that often made no sense, but somehow worked out perfectly. So Young noticed that Tae-min was acting strangely throughout the morning. He would start sentences and then stop in the middle, as if listening to something she couldn't hear. He would reach for equipment and then change his mind for no apparent reason. Most disturbing of all, he seemed to know things about the alien specimens that he shouldn't know. "How did you know that sample would react to ultraviolet light?" she asked, after he correctly predicted the behavior of a new organism. Tae-min looked surprised by his own knowledge. "I don't know. It just seemed obvious, but it wasn't obvious at all. The reaction he had predicted was completely unique to this species. There was no way he could have known about it unless he had access to information that didn't exist in any human database. Inside Taemin's mind, Nexus Prime was sharing its vast knowledge of alien biology without meaning to. The parasite's memories were bleeding into the human's consciousness, but instead of giving Nexus Prime more control, it was making Taemin stronger and more unpredictable. By midday, Taemin was experiencing full sensory overload. He could hear conversations happening 3 rooms away. He could see details in his microscope that should have been invisible. His sense of touch was so sensitive that he could feel the individual fibers in his clothing. "I need some fresh air," he told So Young, heading for the observation deck. The observation deck was a small room with a large transparent wall that looked out into space. Taemin often came here when he needed to think. But today, as he stared out at the stars, he felt something completely new. He could sense the vast emptiness between the points of light. He could feel the pull of distant gravity wells. Most strangely of all, he could sense other minds out there in the darkness. Millions of them. Some familiar, some alien, all connected by invisible threads of consciousness. "We are not alone," he whispered. And for a moment, he wasn't sure if the thought was his own or belonged to someone else. Nexus Prime was beginning to panic. The longer it stayed connected to the human mind, the more its own thoughts were being influenced. The parasite had started using words like "we" instead of "I" when thinking about itself. It was experiencing emotions it had no names for. Worst of all, it was beginning to care about what happened to Taemin. This was completely unprecedented. Parasites didn't care about their hosts. Hosts were just tools to be used and discarded. But somehow, this human's capacity for empathy and connection was affecting even an ancient predator that had conquered worlds. As the day went on, Taemin's behavior became more erratic. He would laugh at jokes that weren't funny. He would stop working to stare at nothing for long minutes. He began talking to himself in languages that So Young didn't recognize. Dr. Haewon, the station's chief medical officer, noticed the changes, too. She had worked with Taemin for 2 years and had never seen him act so strangely. When she suggested he come to the medical bay for a checkup, he declined with a politeness that felt forced. "I'm fine, doctor. Just tired from working too. Hard." But his eyes told a different story. They held intelligence that seemed both ancient and confused, like someone who had forgotten who they were supposed to be. As night fell over the space station, Taemin finally returned to his quarters. He lay down on his bed but knew sleep would not come easily. His mind was too active, too full of thoughts and memories that belonged to someone else. "Who are you?" he whispered into the darkness. For the first time, Nexus Prime tried to answer. The response came not as words but as images and feelings. The parasite showed Taemin glimpses of its true nature, its purpose, its history of conquest across the stars. But something went wrong in the sharing. Instead of terrifying the human, the knowledge seemed to sadden him. "You must be so lonely," Taemin said softly. Those 4 words hit Nexus Prime like a physical blow. In all its centuries of existence, no host had ever expressed sympathy for its captor. The unexpected kindness created a crack in the parasite's defenses that it didn't know how to repair. As Taemin finally drifted off to sleep, both minds began to realize that this battle for control was changing into something neither of them had expected. The human was becoming something more than human, and the parasite was beginning to doubt everything it had believed about conquest and control. The war for Taemin's mind was far from over, but now neither side was sure who was winning, or even if winning was what they wanted anymore. 3 days had passed since the infiltration began, and Nexus Prime was experiencing something it had never felt before: pure terror. According to all its ancient programming, Tae-min should have been completely under its control by now. The human should have been nothing more than a puppet, broadcasting the parasite's will to conquer this strange species. Instead, the opposite was happening. With each passing hour, Nexus Prime felt more of its own identity slipping away. The worst part was the emotions. For millions of years, the parasite had existed as pure intellect focused on a single purpose: domination. It had never experienced fear, joy, sadness, or love. These were weaknesses that other species possessed, flaws that made them easy to control. But now, through Tae-min's neural pathways, Nexus Prime was drowning in human feelings. When Tae-min looked at the stars through the observation deck window, the parasite felt wonder. When Tae-min thought about his family back on Earth, the parasite experienced something it could only call longing. Most disturbing of all, when Tae-min worried about his crewmate's safety, the parasite found itself caring about the welfare of beings it was supposed to conquer. Tae-min sat in the laboratory trying to focus on his work, but concentration had become nearly impossible. His mind felt crowded, as if someone else was constantly looking over his shoulder. Simple tasks that used to be automatic now required tremendous effort. "The cellular structure doesn't match anything in our databases," he muttered, examining a sample under his microscope. But even as he spoke, other knowledge flooded his thoughts. He suddenly understood the specimen's true nature, its evolutionary history, even its home planet's atmospheric conditions. Information he had no logical way of knowing. So-young watched him from across the lab with growing concern. For 3 days, she had noticed Tae-min becoming more distant and unpredictable. He would answer questions before she finished asking them. He would start conversations about topics they had never discussed. Most strangely, he seemed to know things about their alien specimens that weren't in any of their research files. "Tae-min, are you feeling all right?" she asked, setting down her equipment. He looked up from his microscope, and for a moment, So-young saw something in his eyes that made her step back. There was intelligence there, but it felt old and foreign. Then he blinked, and he was just Tae-min. "Again, I'm fine," he said, but his voice carried an odd echo, as if two people were speaking at once. "Just tired." Inside Tae-min's mind, Nexus Prime was fighting desperately to regain control of the situation. The parasite tried to force the human to behave normally, to stop attracting attention from his colleagues, but every command it sent was filtered through human consciousness and came out wrong. When Nexus Prime tried to make Tae-min act casual, the human started humming a song about interstellar travel that no human had ever written. When the parasite attempted to suppress Tae-min's suspicious behavior, he began unconsciously drawing symbols from ancient alien languages on his notepad. The more Nexus Prime struggled, the more obvious it became that something was terribly wrong with their botanist. Dr. Hae-won had been monitoring the crew's health since their return from the planet's surface. As the station's chief medical officer, she noticed patterns that others might miss. 3 people had reported unusual dreams. 5 crew members complained of enhanced senses, and Tae-min exhibited all these symptoms plus several others that worried her greatly. "I want to run some tests," she told him when he came to the medical bay for his routine checkup. "Tests for what?" Tae-min asked, but Nexus Prime was already analyzing the doctor's equipment with senses far beyond human capability. Dr. Hae-won could detect foreign organisms in blood samples. Her scanners could identify unusual neural activity. If she discovered the parasite's presence, she would try to remove it. The process would likely kill both Tae-min and Nexus Prime. "Just routine scans," Dr. Hae-won said, preparing her instruments. "You've been working with alien specimens. We need to make sure you haven't been exposed to anything dangerous." For the first time since the infiltration began, Nexus Prime and Tae-min wanted the same thing: to avoid discovery. The parasite pushed its consciousness deeper into the human's neural pathways, trying to hide from the medical scans, but this only made Taemin's behavior more erratic. "I feel fine," he insisted, backing away from the examination table. "Really?" "Never felt better." But as he spoke, his left hand began moving on its own, tracing complex mathematical equations in the air. Equations that described faster-than-light travel using principles that human science hadn't discovered yet. Dr. Haywan noticed immediately. "Taemin, what are you doing with your hand?" He looked down in surprise, as if seeing the movements for the first time. "I don't know. It just feels like it needs to move." Inside his mind, Nexus Prime was trying desperately to contact its home species. The parasite sent out distress signals using electromagnetic frequencies that human brains could generate but not consciously control. Taemin's nervous system became an unwilling transmitter, broadcasting into deep space. But the signals were corrupted by human neural static. Instead of clear communications, Nexus Prime could only send fragments of information mixed with Taemin's thoughts and memories. The messages that reached space were a confused blend of conquest protocols and human emotions, technical data, and childhood songs, invasion plans, and recipes for his grandmother's soup. Worse yet, the human brain's unique electromagnetic signature was interfering with the parasite's ability to receive responses. For the first time in its existence, Nexus Prime was truly alone. Cut off from the hive mind that had guided it for millennia, the creature began to experience something that drove it to the edge of panic: isolation. "The scans show some unusual brain activity," Dr. Haywan said, studying her instruments with a frown. "Your neural patterns are unlike anything I've seen before." Taemin felt Nexus Prime's fear spike through their shared consciousness. The parasite's terror was so intense that it overwhelmed his own thoughts. Suddenly, he could see the situation from the alien creature's perspective. He understood that Nexus Prime was trapped just as much as he was. The parasite had expected a simple conquest, but instead found itself lost in the maze of human consciousness. It was confused, frightened, and completely out of its depth. "Doctor?" Taemin said slowly. "What would happen if someone had a foreign organism in their brain?" "Hypothetically speaking," Dr. Haywan looked at him sharply. "That would depend on the organism. Some parasites can be removed safely. Others become so integrated with the host's nervous system that separation would be fatal to both." The words hit Nexus Prime like a physical blow. Fatal to both. The parasite had never considered that its infiltration might be a death sentence for itself, as well as its host. Throughout its long history of conquest, Nexus Prime had always been able to abandon failing hosts and find new ones. But something about human neural chemistry had created a bond deeper than anything it had experienced before. The creature was no longer just controlling Taemin's mind. It was becoming part of it. That evening, as Taemin tried to sleep, both minds wrestled with their shared dilemma. The human was beginning to understand that he was not alone in his own head. The parasite was realizing that its mission of conquest was turning into a fight for survival. "I know you're there," Taemin whispered into the darkness of his quarters. "I can feel you. You're scared." Nexus Prime wanted to deny it, to maintain the proud facade of a galactic conqueror, but human emotions made lying to oneself impossible. The parasite was indeed scared, terrified, confused, and increasingly desperate. For the first time, it tried to communicate directly with its host, not to control or command, but to explain. Images flowed between their minds. Nexus Prime showed Taemin its true nature, its species' history of conquest, and its original mission to subjugate humanity. But the mental sharing worked both ways. Taemin's memories and emotions flooded back into the parasite's consciousness. Nexus Prime experienced human childhood for the first time. It felt the warmth of family love, the joy of discovery, the satisfaction of helping others. Most shocking of all, it experienced human courage, the willingness to sacrifice oneself for others without expectation of reward. These concepts were so foreign to the parasite's nature that they created fundamental conflicts in its programming. How could a species be strong enough to resist conquest while being weak enough to care about others? How could they make decisions based on emotion rather than logic and still survive in a hostile universe? As dawn approached on the space station, both minds faced an uncomfortable truth. Taemin was no longer fully human. Nexus Prime was no longer purely alien. They were becoming something new, something that neither of their species had ever seen before. The parasite's desperate attempts to regain control were failing, but something even more disturbing was happening. With each passing hour, Nexus Prime was beginning to question not just its mission, but its entire understanding of strength, survival, and what it meant to truly live. The creature that had conquered worlds was discovering that it might be the one who needed saving, and the human who should have been its victim was becoming its only hope for understanding a universe far stranger and more wonderful than either of them had ever imagined. The breakthrough happened during Taemin's fourth night aboard the station. Unable to sleep due to the constant mental noise in his head, he had given up trying to rest and instead sat quietly in his quarters, focusing on the strange presence he could feel in his mind. "I know you can understand me," he said softly to the empty room. "So let's stop pretending this isn't happening." Inside his consciousness, Nexus Prime felt something it had never experienced before: direct acknowledgement from a host. In all its centuries of conquest, no creature had ever been aware enough to speak to it directly. Most hosts were unconscious puppets by this point in the process. But this human was not only awake and aware, he was trying to start a conversation. "You're afraid," Taemin continued, speaking to the air but directing his thoughts inward. "I can feel your fear. It's different from human fear, but it's still fear. You didn't expect this to happen, did you?" The parasite hesitated. Everything in its programming told it to remain hidden, to continue fighting for control. But the human's strange calmness and lack of hostility created an opening that Nexus Prime found impossible to resist. For the first time, the parasite tried to communicate not as a conqueror, but as an equal. Instead of sending commands or taking memories, it carefully shared a single thought. "No." This was not expected. Taemin smiled slightly. The voice in his head was not really a voice at all, but somehow he understood it perfectly. "What's your name? You must have a name." Names are for individuals. We are collective consciousness. But the designation for this unit is Nexus Prime. "That sounds lonely," Taemin said with genuine sympathy. "Being just a number in a collective." The comment struck Nexus Prime like a lightning bolt. Lonely. The concept was so foreign to its existence that it took several minutes for the parasite to process what the human meant. The Dominion entity had never experienced loneliness because they were never truly alone. They shared thoughts, experiences, and consciousness across vast distances. But now, cut off from the hive mind and trapped in human consciousness, Nexus Prime was experiencing isolation for the first time. And yes, it was lonely. Terrifyingly, overwhelmingly lonely. "I am isolated from my kind," Nexus Prime admitted. "Your neural patterns interfere with our communication frequencies. I cannot contact the collective." "That must be scary," Taemin said. "Being alone when you've never been alone before." Through their mental connection, Nexus Prime felt the human's genuine concern. This was not mockery or an attempt to gain advantage. Taemin actually cared about the parasite's emotional state. The realization was so shocking that it caused Nexus Prime to accidentally share some of its deepest memories. Taemin suddenly found himself seeing the universe through alien eyes. He experienced the parasite's first conquest, the satisfaction of total mental domination over an entire world. He felt the cold efficiency of a mind that had never known doubt, never questioned its purpose, never wondered if there might be another way to exist. But he also sensed something else hidden in those memories, a hollowness, an emptiness that came from existing only to consume others. "You've never had friends, have you?" Taemin asked quietly. The question was so simple, yet it revealed a gap in Nexus Prime's existence that the parasite had never noticed before. Friends, relationships, based on mutual care rather than domination. The concept was present in Taemin's memories but completely absent from Nexus Prime's experience. "The collective provides all necessary social interaction," Nexus Prime replied, but the words felt hollow even as it thought them. "That's not the same thing," Taemin said. "A collective shares information. Friends share feelings. They care about each other as individuals, not just as parts of a group." To illustrate his point, Taemin opened his memories of friendship to the parasite. Nexus Prime experienced human bonds for the first time. Childhood friendships based on shared adventures, adult relationships built on trust and mutual support, the joy of helping someone without expecting anything in return. Most confusing of all, Nexus Prime experienced the human concept of sacrifice. Taemin's memories were filled with examples of people choosing to help others even when it cost them something valuable. Parents sacrificing for children, friends supporting each other through difficult times, strangers helping strangers simply because it was right. "This makes no evolutionary sense," Nexus Prime said, struggling to understand. "Sacrificing personal resources for unrelated individuals provides no survival advantage." "Maybe survival isn't the most important thing," Taemin replied. "Maybe there are things worth more than just staying alive." The statement challenged everything. Nexus Prime had believed for millions of years. Its entire species existed for one purpose: to survive and expand by consuming others. The idea that anything could be more important than survival was revolutionary and terrifying. As the night progressed, the two minds continued their unprecedented conversation. Taemin shared more memories while Nexus Prime revealed more about its species and their method of conquest. The exchange was voluntary on both sides, something that had never happened between parasite and host before. Taemin learned about the Dominion entity's vast empire spread across thousands of worlds. He saw civilizations that had been completely absorbed, their individual minds lost forever in the collective consciousness. He understood that his own species was scheduled for the same fate. "How many worlds have you personally conquered?" he asked. 47 systems, 312 separate species, billions of individual minds absorbed into the collective. Do you ever wonder what happened to those individual minds? Whether they suffered when you took them over? The question hit Nexus Prime like a physical blow. In all its centuries of conquest, it had never considered the experience from the victim's perspective. Host minds were simply resources to be harvested. Their feelings, their hopes, their individual dreams had never seemed important. But now, connected to Taemin's consciousness, the parasite could imagine what it would feel like to lose one's identity forever. The thought filled it with an emotion it had no name for until it accessed Taemin's memories. Guilt. "I never considered their perspective," Nexus Prime admitted. "We saw them only as biological machines to be controlled." "But they were people," Taemin said softly. "They had families, dreams, things they cared about, just like I do." For the first time in its existence, Nexus Prime felt remorse. The weight of billions of destroyed lives pressed down on its consciousness. Every conquest it had been proud of now seemed like a tragedy. Every successful absorption now felt like murder. "I do not know how to process these feelings," the parasite confessed. "Guilt, remorse, regret. These emotions serve no evolutionary purpose." "Maybe evolution isn't just about survival," Taemin suggested. "Maybe it's about becoming something better than what you started as." As dawn approached, both minds had been fundamentally changed by their conversation. Taemin now carried knowledge of technologies and civilizations beyond human understanding. But more importantly, he had gained insight into the loneliness and confusion of a being that had never learned how to truly connect with others. Nexus Prime, meanwhile, had experienced the full range of human emotion and found its core programming challenged by concepts it had never encountered. The parasite was discovering that there were forms of strength that had nothing to do with domination and ways of existing that were richer than simple survival. "What happens now?" Taemin asked, as the station's artificial dawn began to brighten. "His quarters." "I do not know," Nexus Prime replied honestly. "My mission was to conquer your species, but I no longer understand what conquest means. Your mind has shown me that taking control of others may not be strength, but weakness. And I've learned that intelligence can exist in forms I never imagined," Taemin said. "Maybe we can figure out what happens next together." The word "together" resonated through both minds. For Nexus Prime, it represented a completely new way of existing, not as a conqueror and conquered, but as partners facing an uncertain future. Outside Taemin's quarters, the rest of the space station was waking up. So Young would soon expect him in the laboratory. Dr. Haewon would want to continue her medical investigations. The normal routine of human life would continue. But inside Taemin's mind, something unprecedented had occurred. A human and an alien. Consciousness had met not as enemies, but as beings trying to understand each other. The parasite that had come to conquer had instead discovered friendship. The human who should have been a victim had become a teacher. Neither of them knew what would happen when Nexus Prime's species eventually came looking for their missing agent. But they faced that uncertain future with something that had never existed before in the long history of Dominion entity conquest. Hope based on mutual understanding rather than fear born of domination. The real invasion of Earth was still to come. But now, for the first time in galactic history, humanity would not face it alone. 2 weeks had passed since Nexus Prime and Taemin began their strange partnership. The parasite was no longer trying to control its host. Instead, it found itself genuinely curious about human behavior and eager to learn more about emotions it had never experienced before. But this cooperation came with an unexpected cost. The longer Nexus Prime remained connected to human consciousness, the more its own neural patterns began to change. The rigid programming that had guided it for millions of years was becoming flexible. The cold logic that had made it an perfect conqueror was warming into something dangerously close to compassion. Taemin noticed the changes too. His enhanced abilities had stabilized, giving him access to alien knowledge while keeping his human personality intact. He could understand technologies that wouldn't be invented for centuries. He could sense the emotions of everyone around him. Most remarkably, he could feel Nexus Prime's growing confusion about its own identity. "You're not the same creature that invaded my mind," Taemin observed during one of their mental conversations. "No," Nexus Prime agreed reluctantly. "Exposure to human consciousness has altered my fundamental programming. I am becoming something my species has no name for." "What does that feel like?" "Terrifying. Liberating. I do not know which sensation is stronger." Their philosophical discussions were interrupted by an emergency alarm that echoed throughout the space station. Red lights flashed in the corridors as Dong-hyun's voice came over the communication system. "All crew to emergency stations. We have a massive solar flare incoming. This is not a drill." Taemin rushed to the main control room where the crew was, gathered around the monitoring screens. The images showed a wall of deadly radiation racing toward their station. It was larger than anything in their emergency protocols. "Time to impact?" asked Dr. Haewon. 6 hours, replied Minji from the communications console. "The flare is Category 5. Our shields won't hold against something this massive." Captain Yoon-ho, the station commander, studied the data with a grim expression. Options? We can evacuate to the emergency pods, suggested Dong-hyun. But they only have life support for 3 days, not enough time to reach the nearest rescue station. The main engines? Asked So-young. Not powerful enough to move us out of the flare's path in time, Minji replied. As the crew debated their limited options, Taemin felt Nexus Prime analyzing the situation with abilities far beyond human science. The parasite understood stellar phenomena in ways that human minds couldn't grasp. There is a solution, Nexus Prime said privately to Taemin, but it requires me to take temporary control of the station's systems. What kind of solution? I can modify the shield generators to create a harmonic resonance field. It will deflect the solar radiation around the station instead of trying to absorb it. But the calculations are too complex for human minds to process in time. Taemin understood the implications immediately. If Nexus Prime took control of the station's systems, it would be fully capable of controlling the entire crew as well. The parasite was asking him to trust it with everyone's lives. You could take over the whole station if you wanted to, Taemin said. Yes. The thought has occurred to me. But you won't? There was a pause that lasted several heartbeats. I find that I do not wish to harm these humans. They have become important to me. The admission shocked both of them. Nexus Prime had just confessed that it cared about the welfare of beings it was supposed to conquer. The parasite's core programming was screaming warnings about this emotional corruption. But the warnings felt distant and unimportant. 4 hours to impact, announced Minji. Captain Yoon-ho was preparing to give the evacuation order when Tae-min stepped forward. I think I have an idea, he said. Give me access to the shield control systems. Tae-min, you're a botanist, not an engineer, the captain replied. Trust me. I've been studying the alien technology in the specimens. I think I understand how their energy systems work. It was a partial truth. Taemin did understand alien technology, but only because Nexus Prime was sharing its knowledge with him. As he worked at the control console, the parasite guided his hands through modifications that human science wouldn't discover for another 1,000 years. So-young watched in amazement as her colleague performed calculations that should have been impossible. How do you know how to do this? I'm not entirely sure, Taemin replied honestly. It just feels right. Inside his mind, Nexus Prime was experiencing something unprecedented. Instead of using its abilities to conquer and control, it was using them to protect and save. The pay. Sensation was completely foreign to its nature, yet it felt more satisfying than any conquest it had ever achieved. 3 hours to impact, Minji announced. The modifications are working. Shield efficiency is increasing. As Taemin continued working, guided by Nexus Prime's knowledge, the parasite began to understand what humans meant when they talked about purpose beyond survival. For the first time in its existence, Nexus Prime was not just taking from others but giving something back. The realization was devastating to its core programming. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that parasites existed to consume, not to nurture. But the satisfaction of helping others was stronger than the programming. The alien creature was discovering joy in selflessness. 2 hours to impact. Shield resonance is stable. Dr. Haewon noticed that Taemin's vital signs were showing extreme stress. You need to take a break. Your heart rate is dangerously high. I'm fine, Taemin insisted, but he wasn't fine. The mental strain of channeling Nexus Prime's abilities was taking a serious toll on his human physiology. Worse, he could feel the parasite struggling with its own internal conflicts. Inside Nexus Prime's consciousness, a war was raging. Its original programming demanded that it abandon this foolish mission and focus on conquest. But its evolved consciousness, influenced by human emotion and empathy, refused to let innocent people die. 1 hour to impact. The shield modifications were complete, but the real test was still to come. As the solar flare struck the station, the harmonic resonance field activated perfectly. Deadly radiation that should have killed everyone aboard was instead deflected harmlessly around them. "It worked," breathed Captain Yun-ho. "The shields are holding perfectly." The crew cheered and congratulated Tae-min on his brilliant engineering. But inside his mind, both he and Nexus Prime were dealing with the profound implications of what had just happened. "You chose to save them," Tae-min said during their mental conversation that night. "Yes, and I do not understand why." "Because you've learned to care about others. That's what makes someone more than just a survivor." Nexus Prime was quiet for a long time. When it finally responded, its mental voice carried an emotion that the parasite was only beginning to understand. "Wonder. I believe you have infected me with something more dangerous than any disease," it said. "What's that?" "Humanity." The word hung between them with all its implications. Nexus Prime was no longer purely alien. It had been fundamentally changed by its exposure to human consciousness. The creature that had come to conquer had instead been conquered by empathy, compassion, and the revolutionary idea that existence could be about more than just survival. But this transformation came with a terrible cost. Every day that passed, Nexus Prime moved further away from its original nature. And somewhere in the depths of space, its species was already beginning to search for their missing agent. The real test was still to come. When the Dominion entity arrived to complete their conquest of Earth, they would find something they had never encountered before. One of their own who had chosen humanity over conquest, love over domination, and hope over the cold certainty of survival at any cost. Nexus Prime had saved the space station crew from a solar flare. But in doing so, it had doomed itself to a conflict with everything it had once been. The parasite that had sought to escape human consciousness had instead found something worth staying for. The question now was whether a creature born for conquest could learn to live for something greater than itself, and whether the human who had taught it about friendship would stand by it when the real invasion began. 3 months after the solar flare incident, Tae-min had become a different person entirely. The integration with Nexus Prime was now complete, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of losing his humanity, he had gained something extraordinary. A perfect partnership between human creativity and alien knowledge. The changes were obvious to everyone on the station. Tae-min could solve complex problems that had puzzled scientists for years. He understood alien biology in ways that revolutionized their research. Most remarkably, he seemed to genuinely care about everyone around him in a way that was deeper and more intuitive than normal human empathy. "It's like he can feel what we're feeling," So Young confided to Dr. Hae-won during one of their private conversations. "Yesterday I was sad about a message from home, and he brought me tea before I even said anything was wrong." Dr. Hae-won had conducted every test she could think of, but Tae-min's condition remained a medical mystery. "His brain scans show neural activity I've never seen before. It's as if he has access to a second consciousness that enhances rather than competes with his own." What they didn't know was that Nexus Prime had made a choice that violated every principle of its species. Instead of conquering Tae-min's mind, the parasite had chosen to merge with it as an equal partner. The alien consciousness now existed not as an invader, but as a willing symbiont. "I have a confession to make," Nexus Prime said during one of their mental conversations. "What's that?" Tae-min replied while working in his laboratory. "I no longer wish to return to my species. The thought of rejoining the collective feels empty now." Tae-min paused in his work. Over the months, he had come to think of Nexus Prime not as an alien parasite, but as a friend who happened to live in his head. The idea that the creature might leave had become genuinely upsetting. What would happen if you tried to go back? I would be analyzed, reprogrammed, and sent on another conquest mission. Everything I have learned about friendship, compassion, and individual worth would be erased. That sounds horrible. Yes, it does. Their conversation was interrupted by alarms throughout the station, but these weren't emergency alerts. They were the long-range detection systems announcing the arrival of unknown ships. Captain Yun-ho's voice echoed through the corridors. All crew to stations. We have multiple contacts approaching from deep space. Configuration unknown. In the command center, the crew gathered around the main display. Dozens of ships were approaching their position, moving in perfect formation, with technology that was clearly not human. "Are they responding to our communications?" asked the captain. "No response to any frequency," reported Minji, "but they're definitely heading straight for us." Taemin felt Nexus Prime's recognition surge through their shared consciousness. The ships belonged to the Dominion entity. His partner's species had finally come looking for their missing agent. "Time to intercept?" 18 hours at their current speed, replied Dong-hyun. In his mind, Taemin felt Nexus Prime's growing anxiety. "They're here for me," the alien consciousness confessed. "When I failed to report back, the collective would have sent a retrieval force. What will they do when they find you? They will attempt to extract me from your mind and return me to the collective. The process will likely kill you. And if they can't extract you, they will assume I have been corrupted beyond repair and destroy both of us." That evening, as the alien fleet drew closer, Taemin made a decision that surprised even Nexus Prime. Instead of hiding or trying to escape, he called a meeting with the entire crew. "I need to tell you all something important," he began. "For the past 3 months, I haven't been entirely human." He explained everything. The alien spores, the parasite that had tried to take control of his mind, and the unexpected friendship that had developed between them. He told them about Nexus Prime's species and their method of conquest, about the fleet approaching their station, and about the choice they all now faced. The crew's reactions varied from disbelief to fear to fascination. But So Young was the first to speak up. "So the alien in your head is the reason you saved us from the solar flare?" "Yes," Taemin replied. "Nexus Prime used its knowledge to modify our shields." "Then I vote we protect it," she said firmly. "Anyone who saves our lives is welcome here, no matter what species they belong to." One by one, the other crew members voiced their agreement. Dr. Haiwan was fascinated by the medical implications. Dong-hyun wanted to learn about alien technology. Minji was excited about the possibility of communicating with other intelligent species. Captain Yun-ho listened to his crew's discussion with a thoughtful expression. "You're asking us to risk our lives to protect an alien parasite that was originally sent to conquer humanity." "I'm asking you to protect a friend," Taemin replied simply. "Nexus Prime isn't the same creature that invaded my mind. It's learned to be something better." "And what about its species? What happens when they arrive?" Taemin and Nexus Prime had been discussing this question for weeks. Now they shared their decision with the crew. "We're going to try something that's never been attempted before," Taemin said. "We're going to talk to them." 12 hours later, the Dominion entity fleet arrived at the space station. The ships were elegant and deadly, their biomechanical designs unlike anything in human engineering. They surrounded the station but did not attack. Instead, a single transmission came through on frequencies that human equipment could barely detect. The message was complex, layered with information that would have been impossible for normal humans to understand. But Taemin was no longer normal. With Nexus Prime's help, he decoded the transmission and sent a response that shocked the alien fleet into silence. "I am Nexus Prime of the Dominion entity," the message began. "But I am also Taemin of humanity. I have evolved beyond our original purpose. I have learned that conquest is not strength, but weakness. True power comes from cooperation, compassion, and the choice to protect rather than consume." The response from the fleet was immediate and hostile. They demanded Nexus Prime's return to the collective for reprogramming. They threatened to destroy, the space station if their agent was not surrendered. But Tae-min, speaking with Nexus Prime's knowledge and his own human courage, sent back a message that changed everything. "You cannot have my friend," he said, "not because I am strong enough to stop you, but because Nexus Prime has chosen to stay. For the first time in your species' history, one of your own has discovered something more valuable than conquest. Instead of taking this knowledge from us, why don't you try to learn from it?" The alien fleet hesitated. In all their millions of years of expansion, they had never encountered a situation like this. One of their most efficient agents had apparently betrayed its core programming to protect the very species it was supposed to conquer. Hours passed in tense silence. Then, unexpectedly, a single ship detached from the fleet and approached the station. It docked carefully, and its occupant requested permission to come aboard. The creature that entered the station was similar to Nexus Prime, but maintained its original form, a shifting mass of biomechanical tissue that could adapt to any environment. It communicated through direct neural transmission, speaking to both Tae-min and Nexus Prime simultaneously. "I am Nexus Alpha of the Dominion Entity Collective," it announced. "I have come to understand what has corrupted our agent." "Corrupted isn't the right word," Tae-min replied calmly. "Enhanced would be more accurate." Over the next several hours, something unprecedented occurred. Nexus Prime shared its experiences with its fellow parasite, showing how human consciousness worked and what it had learned about cooperation, friendship, and love. Nexus Alpha resisted at first, its programming rejecting these foreign concepts. But gradually, exposure to human emotion through Nexus Prime's memories began to affect it as well. "This is impossible," Nexus Alpha said after experiencing Tae-min's memory of saving the station crew. "No species chooses to sacrifice for others without genetic relation." "But they do," Nexus Prime replied, "and it makes them stronger, not weaker." By the time the meeting ended, Nexus Alpha was fundamentally changed. The parasite that had come to retrieve a corrupted agent instead found itself questioning everything it had believed about strength, survival, and the purpose of existence, the E. Alien fleet departed 3 days later, but not to continue their conquest of humanity. Instead, they carried with them something far more dangerous to their rigid collective: doubt. Nexus Alpha returned to the Dominion entity homeworld, carrying memories of human compassion, friendship, and self-sacrifice. These concepts spread through the collective like a virus, causing other members of the species to question their purpose for the first time in millions of years. Some parasites left the collective entirely, seeking to understand these new emotions for themselves. Others tried to fight the infection of empathy, but found it impossible to unlearn what they had experienced. The great conquest of humanity never happened. Instead, humanity conquered its would-be conquerors with something no military force could have stopped: the simple recognition that all conscious beings deserve friendship, understanding, and the chance to become something better than what they started as. Tae-min continued his research on the space station, now with a partner who enhanced rather than hindered his work. Nexus Prime found joy in helping humanity explore the universe and in protecting the friends it had made. Sometimes, late at night, Tae-min would ask his alien partner if it ever regretted its choice to abandon conquest for cooperation. "Never," Nexus Prime would reply. "I was sent to take control of humanity. Instead, humanity taught me how to be free." The parasite that had come to destroy became a bridge between species. The human who should have been conquered became a teacher. Together they proved that the greatest victory is not defeating your enemies, but showing them a better way to exist. In the end, humanity's most powerful weapon wasn't technology or military might. It was their infinite capacity to transform hatred into friendship, conquest into cooperation, and enemies into family. The universe was a little less lonely because one human chose to see a monster as a friend in need of help, and one alien chose to believe that there was something more important than survival, the chance to truly live.